My dad told me I wasn't ready for parenthood. You can't handle it, he said. I just told him I was fine without his advice. Now he's asking for an apology, claiming he was only trying to help. He's been telling everyone that I'm not cut out for it. And now my family's taking sides. I honestly never thought things would get to this point. I always knew my family could be a little dramatic, but I never imagined that something like this would tear us apart. Let me start from the beginning. A couple of months ago, I found out I was pregnant. It wasn't exactly a surprise. My fiance and I had been talking about it for a while, and although we weren't trying, we also weren't avoiding it either. So when the test came back positive, I was nervous but excited. I was ready for this. I've always wanted to be a mother. My fiance, Mark, was over the moon, and we immediately started making plans. I was hesitant at first about telling my parents. They're both traditional, and while I knew they'd be happy for me in a way, I also knew they might have their doubts. I'm the youngest in the family, and in their eyes, I've never really grown up the way my older siblings had. But I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd be supportive. I was wrong. I called my mom first. She was, as expected, thrilled. She immediately started talking about what kind of baby clothes I should get, how to set up the nursery, all the things you'd want to hear when you're about to become a parent. I felt a little more reassured, like maybe I was doing the right thing after all. But when I called my dad, everything shifted. He didn't exactly yell, but his tone was so cold. "You're sure about this, right?" he asked, almost skeptically. "Yeah, I'm sure," I replied, trying to keep things light. Mark and I are both really excited. We've already started making some plans. "Well, it's not going to be easy. You're not ready for this," he said, his voice growing more serious. "You've always been a little irresponsible. This isn't like some hobby you can just drop when it gets tough. You can't just think it'll be fine because you want it to be." I was caught off guard. I've always been independent. I've always done things on my own terms, even if it meant going against the grain of what my family thought was proper. But this was different. I wanted them to be supportive, to at least pretend they had some faith in me. Instead, he sounded like he was talking to me like I was a child. "I'm fine, Dad," I said, a little hurt, but trying not to let it show. "I can handle this. Mark and I have been talking about everything. We're both on the same page." "You'll see," he said. "When you're up all night with a crying baby, when you realize how much you've given up, you'll regret it. But it'll be too late by then." The conversation ended there, and I was left sitting with my phone in my hand, feeling like someone had just thrown a bucket of cold water over me. I wasn't expecting a standing ovation, but I at least thought he'd be happy for me. I thought he'd offer some advice or share in the excitement. But instead, he just crushed my confidence. The days that followed were tense, to say the least. My dad kept making little comments whenever we spoke, like he couldn't help himself. It was always the same thing: "You're not ready. It's going to be harder than you think." I started avoiding him on the phone because every time we talked, I could feel his doubt hanging in the air. And then it escalated. I hadn't even told my extended family yet, but my dad had already started telling everyone that I wasn't cut out for this. I'd hear through the grapevine, like my aunt calling me to ask if everything was okay, or my cousin texting me to check in. They weren't being subtle about it either. They'd say things like, "Your dad's really concerned about you," or "He's just looking out for you." One night, it all boiled over. I was sitting at the dinner table with my parents when my dad just blurted out, "I really think you should reconsider. This is going to change your life forever, and I don't think you're ready for it. You're still so young, and you're acting like it's just some fun little thing to do." I couldn't take it anymore. I had been biting my tongue for weeks, but hearing him talk about my future like it was some mistake, something that needed to be fixed, was too much. "Dad," I said, my voice a little sharper than I intended, "I'm not a kid anymore. I know what I'm getting into. I'm not asking for your approval, and I don't need your permission to live my life." His eyes widened in surprise, like I had slapped him, And my mom just sat there, quietly sipping her wine, looking at her plate. It was like she didn't even want to get involved. "Excuse me," he asked, his tone icy. "You don't need my permission? What kind of a parent would I be if I didn't at least try to help you see reason? You're not prepared for this, and I'm just trying to make sure you don't make a huge mistake." I could feel my blood pressure rising. I knew I was about to lose my temper, but at that point, I didn't care. "Maybe I don't want your help," I said, standing up from the table. "I'm fine without it, okay? I don't need to be told how to live my life." I left the room before he could say anything else, and I haven't really spoken to him much since. But the damage was done. I was angry, hurt, honestly, and now he was walking around telling anyone who would listen that I wasn't ready for parenthood, that I was making a huge mistake, and that I wasn't cut out for it. The more time passed, the more I could feel the weight of everything piling up. My dad wasn't letting go of this. And honestly, it was starting to feel like every conversation I had with him was just another round of him trying to lecture me about how I wasn't ready for parenthood. It wasn't even about offering advice anymore. He was just relentlessly pushing his doubts on me. One night, a couple of weeks after our last argument, I got a call from my cousin Claire. We've always been close, even though she's a little older than me and lives across the state. I thought she was calling to catch up, maybe checking on how things were going with the pregnancy, but when I picked up, I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, sounding concerned. I frowned. "Yeah, I'm fine." "What?" "Well, I don't know how to say this," she started, pausing before continuing, "but I've been talking to Uncle Greg, and he's really worried about you." "About the baby." I let out a small sigh, already knowing where this was going. "He's telling you that I'm not ready." Claire hesitated, then said, "Well, but it's not just that. He's really convinced that you're making a huge mistake. He's been saying some things about how you're not capable of this. And I just, I don't know. It's starting to feel like it's getting out of hand." I rubbed my forehead, trying to stay calm. "Claire, I don't need him talking about my life like that. I'm not asking for his approval. I've been with Mark for years. We've got this handled. I'm not some kid who needs to be told what to do all the time." She sighed. I know. But you know how he is. It's like he just wants to protect you, even if it's in a way that doesn't make sense. And now my mom's been talking about it too. They're all saying the same things. I felt the anger bubbling up again. It was like this cloud hanging over me, and every time I thought it might clear, it just got thicker. What are they saying? That I can't do this? That I'm too young, too irresponsible? Well, kind of, she said almost nervously. But it's also like they're saying you're not thinking things through. They're worried about how you're going to handle the baby, and they think you might not be ready for the commitment. At that point, I just snapped. I am ready. I don't need their validation. I'm not some little girl anymore. I'm having a baby with the man I love, and we're going to make it work. They can't just keep treating me like I don't know what I'm doing. Claire went quiet for a moment. I get it, I really do. But just think about it. Maybe this could blow over if you just apologized to him. Maybe if you just told him you understood where he was coming from, he'd back off. It doesn't have to be such a big thing. I was silent for a long moment, processing what she was saying. "I don't want to apologize for something I didn't do wrong, Claire. I'm not going to pretend like I made a mistake when all I did was stand up for myself. He's the one who won't let it go." She sighed, probably realizing I wasn't going to change my mind, but said, "I understand. I just don't want you to get more stressed out over this, you know?" I hung up feeling more frustrated than ever. Claire was just trying to be the voice of reason, but all I could think about was how my family was slowly turning against me. I hadn't even told my mom what Claire had said yet, but I knew deep down she probably felt the same way. It felt like no one in my family was willing to take my side, and that was a sinking feeling I couldn't shake. The tension with my dad wasn't just affecting me anymore. It was starting to affect Mark too. He could see how it was eating away at me, how every little comment from my dad or anyone else in my family made me feel like I was doing something wrong. I could tell Mark wanted to say something to my dad, but he didn't want to make things worse. I could see the conflict in his eyes every time we talked about it, like he was just as torn as I was. The tension had been building for weeks, and it seemed like every interaction with my family was just another reminder of how divided we were. But it wasn't until one particular Sunday afternoon that things took a turn I wasn't prepared for. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through some baby names with Mark, when I heard a knock on the door. We weren't expecting anyone, and I couldn't help but feel a bit uneasy when I went to answer it. There stood my dad, looking more serious than I'd ever seen him. No greeting, no small talk. Just him standing there with his arms crossed. He was clearly upset, and I could feel the weight of his presence pressing down on me. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice stiff. I hesitated for a moment before nodding, stepping aside to let him in. Mark shot me a look, but I just gave him a small, reassuring smile before turning back to my dad. I wasn't sure what this was going to be, but I knew I didn't want it to drag on. "I've been hearing things," my dad began, his voice low but edged with frustration. "Things that you've been saying about me, about how I've been treating you." I raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," he snapped. "You've been telling people I'm controlling, that I don't respect you. That's not what I was trying to do, and you know it." I crossed my arms, trying to keep my cool. "I never said that. I said you were undermining me. I said you don't believe I can handle this. I said you were treating me like a child." He took a step forward, and I could see the anger building in his eyes. "You don't know what it's like to be a parent. You have no idea what you're getting into. You think it's all about the baby, but it's not. It's about the whole life you're giving up, and you're too blinded by your own plans to see it." I didn't back down. I know exactly what I'm getting into. And I'm not doing this just for the sake of having a baby. I'm doing this because I'm ready. I'm doing this because I want to do it. You don't get to dictate my life anymore. His face twisted in disbelief. "You think I'm just trying to control you? I'm trying to help you, but you don't want my help. You think you know better than me, but you don't." I was shaking with frustration now. "I never said I didn't want your help. I said I don't need you treating me like I'm not capable. You think you know what's best, but you're not living my life. You don't get to decide if I'm ready or not." There was a long silence as he stared at me, and for a moment, it felt like we were both holding our breath. He opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off. "I don't need an apology," I said, my voice steady. "But I'm not going to sit here and let you keep telling everyone I'm not ready for this. I don't care who you talk to or what you say behind my back. I'm doing this with or without your support." The room seemed to close in around us as my dad stood there, speechless for the first time in our conversation. He opened his mouth once more, but then closed it as if he couldn't figure out how to respond. Finally, he just shook his head, muttering under his breath as he turned to leave. "This isn't over," he said, the words hanging in the air. I closed the door behind him, my heart racing. I didn't feel relieved, though. I felt worse. I knew this was far from over, and now, things had just escalated to a level I wasn't prepared for. Mark didn't say anything at first. He could tell I was shaken, but he knew better than to push me. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the situation settling over us. The next few days were even worse. My dad didn't stop. If anything, he got more vocal. Word had spread through the family, and the pressure to make amends only grew. I started getting messages from relatives. Some try to be neutral, others just try to talk some sense into me. It felt like everyone was picking sides, and the whole thing was spiraling out of control. The worst part? I could feel my mom's presence in the background. She wasn't saying anything directly, but I knew she was taking his side. She wasn't exactly defending me, either. It was like I was being pushed to the edge of a cliff, and everyone was waiting for me to jump. A few days after my last conversation with my dad, the pressure had reached a boiling point. My family kept pushing me, trying to convince me to just apologize to smooth things over like it was that simple. But the more I heard, the more I realized I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to let them make me feel small, like I wasn't capable of making my own decisions. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner with Mark, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I knew this wasn't going to be an easy conversation, but it was one that needed to happen. I called my dad and asked him to meet me at a local park the next day. I didn't want to do it at home. I didn't want to risk things getting out of hand in front of anyone else. He agreed, which surprised me a little, but I guess he didn't expect what was coming. When we met, I took a deep breath before speaking. "I'm done with this," I said, looking him square in the eyes. "I'm not going to keep listening to you tell me I'm not ready. I'm not going to let you decide what I'm capable of anymore." He opened his mouth to interrupt, but I held up a hand. "Let me finish. You keep telling everyone that I'm making a mistake, that I'm not cut out for this. But what you don't get is that you're making me question everything. I've never needed your approval to make my own decisions, and I'm not about to start now. I'm having a baby with Mark, and we're going to raise this child no matter what you think." His face twitched with frustration, but I wasn't backing down. "I respect you, Dad. I do. But that doesn't mean I need you to tell me what's best for my life. I'm an adult now. I've made my own decisions, and I'm going to live with them." There was silence for a long moment. I could see the conflict in his eyes, but I wasn't about to let him manipulate me into feeling guilty anymore. "I'm not going to apologize," I said finally, my voice steady. "And I'm not going to sit here and let you keep trying to turn everyone against me. If you want to be in my life, you need to respect my choices. I don't need your approval. I just need you to stop doubting me." He stared at me, still processing everything. Then slowly he nodded. "It wasn't the apology I wanted, but it was something. I don't want you to get hurt," he said quietly. "But I get it. I see you're determined." "I am," I said, my voice firm. "And that's not going to change." We stood there for a few more moments in silence. But this time, it wasn't the suffocating silence from before. It was different, almost like a turning point. My dad sighed and gave a half-hearted smile. "I guess I'll have to let go of the idea of being in control." I laughed, shaking my head. "You don't have to control everything, Dad. You just have to support me. That's enough." And just like that, the tension between us began to ease. Over the next few weeks, things started to calm down. My dad, while still a little overbearing at times, started to respect my boundaries. Slowly, my family stopped picking sides. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had control over my life again. In the end, it all came down to one thing: standing up for myself. I wasn't the same person I was when I first got pregnant. I wasn't the same person who would cower when someone told me I wasn't capable. I had learned that I was stronger than I thought, and I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel less than that. Now, my question for you all: am I the a-hole for not apologizing? For standing my ground and not giving in to my dad's expectations? I just need some perspective because I'm still not sure if I handle this right. What do you all think? If you've enjoyed this story and want to see more content like this, make sure to like and subscribe. Don't forget to write your thoughts in the comments.